Today's lesson offers a description of natural law and shows how we can use natural law to guide moral reasoning. What is the natural law? It can help at first to describe what natural law is not like. Natural law is not like the laws of nature or the laws of physics. Natural law also does not treat biology as a moral authority. For example, there are species of animals that in certain conditions will eat their young. That's hardly good moral wisdom for human beings. Sometimes people expect morality to be clear. They want things to be right or wrong, good or bad, black or white. But natural law does not work that way either. Now a little about what natural law is like. Natural law is rooted in reasoning about the best thing to do. It's more like art than arithmetic because it encourages us to create things, to create a good life, to create a good community, a good team, a good family, and a good society. And it's not like an external authority. It works with aspects of our own agency, and sometimes we feel it in our heart. Natural law is part of a larger understanding of law, but it's not the most typical understanding of law we work with today. Civil law today focuses on interpreting written legislation. Thomas Aquinas describes law as a precept of practical reason. It's promulgated, which means it's formally announced as law, and promulgated by the legitimate authority, the political authority with responsibility for this part of our society. And law works for the common good, what's good for persons and groups. We've already learned about practical reason. Thomas distinguishes practical reason from speculative reason. So for review, here are some comprehension check questions. Which type of reasoning is attentive to features of a specific context? Which type of reasoning is abstract and makes no reference to a specific context? Which type of reasoning changes from person to person, culture to culture, differs according to historical context, and can even change from situation to situation? Which type of reasoning has internal coherence or logical validity as its goal? Which type of reasoning aims to contribute to a good life? Which type of reasoning does not change with circumstances? Which type of reasoning do we check whether we're right or wrong by checking our thinking? And with which type of reasoning do we check whether we're right or wrong by putting our reasoning into action? This slide has the answers to our comprehension check questions. We can summarize Thomas' distinction between speculative reasoning and practical reasoning with these phrases. Speculative reasoning is reasoning unto itself. Practical reasoning is reasoning about what to do. Thomas situates his understanding of law within his understanding of God's relationship with creation and the relationships that God establishes among people, societies, non-human animals, and the physical world. This drawing captures Thomas's understanding of the different types of law. Take some time to look at this figure and formulate some questions about Thomas's understanding of law. Pause the video to give you some time to stop and think, and click play when you're done formulating your questions. The descriptions here explain Thomas's understanding of law a little further. Thomas thinks of God as a ruler. God's governance of the created world serves as the template or standard for what could be considered sound practical reasoning. Natural law names the participation of the material world with God's sovereignty. Thomas says human beings participate in God's sovereignty in a most excellent way, through reason. God counts on people to help move the world in the right direction. See if this slide can help you answer your questions about Thomas Aquinas' view of law. If you still have questions, please bring them to your teacher's attention. How do we learn the natural law? Thomas thinks we learn natural law in a number of ways. He thinks our emotional inclinations can sometimes give us a sense of what's helpful for us and what has the ability to hurt us. Playing with friends feels good. Growling dogs feel scary. And emotional inclinations like these, Thomas says, do carry some moral wisdom. As we live, he says we also learn. Each of our experiences is unique in its own moment in history. But we find that some patterns repeat, and things that work well for us most of the time become established practices, moral norms worth following. We learn some moral norms from our elders and those with great wisdom, and people also learn from divine revelation, which often reinforces what we learned from experience, but sometimes points to new understandings. For example, Jesus teaches that we should love our enemies. Thomas considers the moral wisdom of this norm to be so remote from experience that humanity would be unlikely to learn it without divine intervention. People who look to practical reason to discern moral norms tend to follow one of two models. The first model is called physicalism. Theologically speaking, this approach sees human beings as God's created works. We can learn about God's hopes for humanity by understanding human nature and paying attention to human faculties. Physicalist approaches to natural law identify an end or purpose for each human faculty, and they name moral norms that guide our faculties toward their divinely created ends. For example, the human ability to eat supports the end or purpose of good nutrition. From this, we can deduce that we should eat for good health. Or the human capacity for speech, which allows people to communicate, leads to the norm that we should speak truthfully, so communication supports good relationships. What do you think about the other human faculties named here? What moral norms do you expect natural law physicalism to deduce for each of these faculties? Pause the video to give yourself some time to think. Okay, now check your work. Are your answers the same as the ones on the slide here? Probably not, right? Or at least not 100% the same. So even if we agree with the approach natural law physicalism takes, we see that there can be different points of view. But not everyone agrees with natural law physicalism. There's another model of natural law called personalism. Its proponents do not think we should look at human capabilities in isolation from each other. Instead, they think we should look at a person as a whole, in totality. They also believe that God creates human beings, but they interpret God's intent for humanity more broadly. God creates human beings for happiness. When we have an adequate understanding of the human person in totality, we also come to understand what practices promote human flourishment, or in other words, what contributes to a good life. These become our moral norms. How do we follow the natural law? Here too we see two different approaches. Natural law physicalism tends to reason deductively, and natural law personalism tends to reason inductively. To see how these approaches can yield different conclusions, we are going to look at a classic case study from Western ethical thought. St. Augustine poses a version of this case in the 4th century. Imagine we have a friend whom I know to be innocent, but government authorities think he has committed treason. Because my friend is a fugitive from government, I have offered him shelter in my home. I know that if government authorities find and arrest my friend, they will put him to death. Now imagine a police officer comes to my front door. When I answer the door, the officer asks if my friend is there. What should I say? Natural law physicalism reasons deductively. This means we take the moral norm, tell the truth, and we apply it to this situation. When we do this, we can reach a conclusion in 3 logical steps. Can you figure them out? Stop the video to take some time and think, and click play when you're ready to move forward. The deductive syllogism we would follow here starts by interpreting the moral norm. To tell the truth, we need to tell the officer what we understand. Then it connects the moral norm to the present situation. I understand that my friend is hiding here. The last part names our action. I should tell the officer my friend is hiding here. Personalism, on the other hand, reasons inductively. Instead of starting with our moral norm, it starts with the present situation. We ask ourselves, what in this situation works for the well-being of the people involved? To answer this question, we consider the norm to tell the truth, and we look also to other moral norms that help us identify the morally relevant aspects of this situation. What do you think we should consider here? These questions might help us uncover complexities we failed to recognize when we first looked at this case study. Feel free to pause the video to give yourself time to stop and think about them. I mentioned that this case study is a classic in Western ethical tradition. How do you suppose Immanuel Kant responds to this case? Do you think he would conclude that I should tell the police officer where my friend is hiding? Or do you think he would advise me to do something else? When Kant writes about this case, he concludes that I should tell the police officer where to find my friend. How about St. Thomas Aquinas? How do you think he responds to this case? Should I tell the police officer where my friend is hiding, or should I do something else? Thomas Aquinas does not conclude that I should lie to the police officer. After all, the officer represents the legal authority of government. And I might reasonably conclude, depending on the facts of the case, that I should tell the officer everything. But Thomas also thinks another course of action could be legitimate. I can tell the officer something that's technically correct, but that does not actually disclose the location of my friend. The officer asks, "Is my friend here?" I can say, "No, he's not here," meaning he's not here where I'm standing, and choose not to disclose exactly where my friend is hiding. To understand better how natural law can guide our choices, we can look at 3 levels of norms. We have universal precepts, which are always binding, but are very broad in application and vague. They tell us things like tell the truth, promote good health, sustain human life, encourage education, give people what we owe them, consume pleasurable foods and drinks with moderation, face danger with courage. These norms always guide us in the right direction, but their guidance is so vague it's hard to know exactly how they're guiding us to act. To better connect universal precepts to concrete situations, we turn to middle axioms. Middle axioms generally give us correct moral guidance, but circumstances do vary from one situation to another. If we turn again to our case study, we have the universal precept, tell the truth. This is always binding and unlikely to be an error, but it is less helpful for guiding us in specific instances. These middle axioms associated with truth-telling offer more specific guidance. For example, in a specific cultural context, we may expect exaggeration, like if we're buying a used car. A used car salesperson is generally presumed to expect that the buyer is ready for salesmanship. This doesn't mean the salesperson can lie. The buyer is going to spend a lot of money, and inaccurate information undermines their freedom to make a good choice. But the salesperson might say the engine runs well, that spark plugs are like new, and the transmission box is tight. But the buyer should beware. Each of these vague statements could distract me from what I really want to know. A third kind of moral norm is a concrete particular. This is a specific moral judgment. It applies to each choice we make. Of these norms, concrete particulars change most from instance to instance and are most likely to be wrong. In summary, natural law is an approach to doing ethics that informs our practical reasoning. The name natural law can be somewhat confusing. Natural law does not work like the laws of physics, and natural law does not treat biology as a source for moral wisdom. Natural law also differs from contemporary understandings of civil law, which focus on interpreting written legislation. Natural law seeks to guide practical reason toward choices that support human flourishment and the common good. Natural law physicalism tends to reason deductively from a very general understanding of human faculties and then names moral norms, the steps that we need to take to allow our faculties to reach their adduced purposes. Natural law personalism, on the other hand, reasons inductively. It encourages us to use moral norms to help us understand the values at stake in a situation so we make well-informed choices. When working with moral norms, universal norms are always applicable, but vague. Middle axioms tend to guide us well, though circumstances do vary, and concrete material norms apply to specific situations, but they change most and are the most likely to be wrong.